folks, I hope you're doing well. A couple of months ago or so, I took you on a little bit of a local tour around my neighbourhood here in Miyako, here up in Iwate, where I live in Japan. And I showed you some of the everyday street scenes, street furniture and so forth that will help me draw a new piece of artwork. Now this is a piece of artwork that I am going to do in 3 different ways. I'm going to create a piece of pixel art. I'm going to have a hand-inked version which will be shaded in colour using Copic markers and so forth, and then there'll be a third version of it which is basically again hand-inked but a black and white manga panel, because ultimately this is a scene that's going to appear in my new debut manga that's going to be coming out very shortly, called Future Saviours. By the way, if you want to find out a bit more about that, you may be interested in my most recent feature-length video, which is all about how the Great East Japan earthquake of 2011, or the Higashi Nihon Daishinsai, has influenced my artwork since moving to Japan. You'll find much more about the manga in there, and in fact some of the context perhaps of this particular scene that I drew. So I'm not going to dwell too much upon the tools that were used. Suffice to say, very basic tools: a pair of triangles, some rulers, one of which is an angled ruler that allows me to adjust it, at 15-degree increments, and just an old-fashioned pen, pencil and so forth. So when I got back from looking around the local neighbourhood, one of the first things I did was crack out my sketchbook and just draw a few ideas that incorporated some of the elements that we saw around the local area, such as traffic lights, street lights, other bits and pieces like telegraph poles, and just a general idea of sort of some of the street furniture that is going to be very integral to the background scenery in Future Saviours, to give it that essence of authenticity, shall we say, because it's at least a good 8 or 9 hour drive from here to Tokyo, which I'm not going to be doing in any real hurry, so particularly as I have Japan on my doorstep. So from that, I was then able to basically take an ordinary piece of paper, and just by using just my standard tools which I showed you, to draw a background. Now I did this first of all using pencil. So here's the pencil outline. You can see some red pencil over certain elements of it, where basically I'm just correcting my ideas and so forth, or just to note where something isn't quite right. And also I would have had my image of Saki, which I reduced on the copy key. This isn't the reduced size version, but I took a photocopy onto B5 size paper, laid her over the back of the sketch, clipped her in place so that I could get the scale correct as well. So basically this was the sketch that I came up with. Now I had a very clear idea in my mind of what I wanted. I didn't want it to be a major urban street or a major urban road. I wanted it almost to be like a back street, the kind of place where you'll find the best ramen restaurant in the world, for example. A little bit like the lanes in Brighton, for example. And also the particular streets I had in mind Tokyo-wise were some of the streets that I saw around Nerima when I stayed there back in March of last year, but also Shimo Kitazawa, sorry. That really influenced the kind of ideas in my head of what this street scene should look like. Not a major thoroughfare, just a back street with a few details. Now I'm not going to tell you too much about this background because it already gives away a few little elements about Future Saviours, but suffice to say it's going to be somewhere that Saki walks through, and she's going to notice that her things are just slightly off. They're not off in terms of what they are, but there's just going to be something about the story of Future Saviours that's going to make her think, that can't be right, surely. Anyway, that's basically what I came up with. And then after that, using my tracing table, I was basically able to trace the pencil outline and create the ink outline. Now this is just onto standard copy paper. In fact, there are a few bits where it went slightly awry. Like for example, you can see the smudge around the window frame here. Such is life, but there you go. But otherwise, mostly it's perfectly adequate for what this is going to be used for, which is to convert it into an outline which I can use for pixel art. So those errors can be cleaned up digitally, because when it comes to creating the colour version, which I will do with Copic markers, and also the version that I use actually in the manga, it's going to have to be re-inked anyway. So what I did is I took this page down to the copy machine at Lawson, the Konbini here, and I basically scanned this at 400 dpi using colour mode. I didn't use grayscale because that way it preserved as much detail as possible. and that gave me the image that I could take into Photoshop. Now, the process for converting an outline like that in Photoshop into something that is suitable for pixel art is quite simple. First of all, load the image into Photoshop or the application of your choice which you're editing your image in, and just crop out the white boundary. You don't need the outside edge of the image because obviously you want to have everything tight up to the edge of the screen or your piece of pixel art. Once your image is correctly cropped, I opened up the curves tool. Now in Photoshop you can press Command and M, or presumably on Windows Control and M, but it's in the image menu nonetheless. And with the curve tool in any application which you may be using, you can adjust the black point and the white point of the image of basically where the tones are going to get clipped. Now this is with all RGB channels selected. This is not just with the red or the green or the blue channels selected, it's with the full RGB channels selected. And just by dragging in the black mark and the white mark, you can determine what's going to basically be the black point or the darker parts of the image, and what's going to be the white point or the lighter parts of the image. So in essence, we're going to be blowing the highlights and also making the shadows muddy in essence. But this is going to emphasize those black and white outlines that were drawn and allow us to get a little bit closer to an outline that we can use for pixel art. The second step is to resize the image to the size that your final piece of pixel art background is going to be. Now, I will only emphasize this enough. Do not convert your image to index color at this stage. Leave it in RGB mode because you're going to want it to anti-alias your resized image. This is very important. Now, I took my image of Saki, which you can see in the background here, and laid her over the top. And what I did was, using Photoshop, I was able to work out what size the background piece of art should be in terms of pixel height, because I didn't want Saki to look too big or indeed too small against the background. Once I'd got the correct value, I resized. Now I left it to basically do a smooth resize. I didn't use nearest neighbor or anything like that. So that basically, yes, it's quite low resolution now, say about 800 pixels tall, which is quite high res for pixel art, to be fair. And then when you zoom in, obviously you can see all the grayscales and perhaps some colours still in the image. Now the next step is where you're going to actually turn everything into pure black or white, and that's using the threshold tool. Now in Photoshop, again, this is in the image menu, but most applications like GIMP and other image processing software such as PaintShop Pro or whatever you might be using will have a threshold tool. And what this does is it will basically turn the image into pure black and white, and you can set at which point the colours will either become pure black or whether they'll become pure white. So in Photoshop you have what looks like to be a bar graph, a histogram, and you'll have a slider at the bottom with an arrow. And everything to the left of that arrow, depending on where it is, will be turned to black. And everything that's to the right of the arrow will be turned to white. So you can adjust that arrow to where you're comfortable for your image. Now you will lose some detail here. There is going to be some trade-off. There will be parts of your outline that disappear that you're going to have to patch back in, and likewise there'll be parts of it which are just a little bit too dense, where you're going to just need to take the pixels out manually. But once you've done your threshold, you've now got your pure black and white image. Now it's at this point that you would want to save or change the image over to index color. Now I actually forgot this step. I saved as a 24-bit image, but this is completely unnecessary because it's just pure black and white. It's basically a 1-bit image. It's either black or it's white. So just change it over to index color, and this is where you have a couple of choices. If you're using a modern package such as Photoshop or Ace Sprite or PaintShop Pro or whatever you're going to be doing your pixel art in on a modern system, you can save as a PNG image. I always use PNG over GIF. Yes, of course, GIFs can be animated, but let's face it, there's a good reason that PNG exists. So save it as a PNG. If you're going to be taking it onto a system like I am, the Commodore Amiga with Deluxe Paint, you'll want to save it as an IF image. Now, miraculously, Photoshop still supports saving as an IF image in 2021. All you have to do is go to File, Save As, and in the Format menu you'll see IF, IFF. Choose that option, save your image, and when prompted it will ask you, do you want Amiga format or Maya format? Just make sure that Amiga is chosen in the radio options. And there it is, you'll have your IF image which you can edit in Deluxe Paint. So the next step is to, as I previously alluded to, is you're going to need to patch in some of those details which have either gone missing when you use the threshold tool, so you're just going to be putting a little bit more black just to patch up the lines, because as we all know, if there's a gap in an object, say you've got a little hole at the bottom of the telegraph pole, or within the street light, or within the Larman shop sign, as soon as you use that flood fill tool, it's going to spill out everywhere, so patch in those little gaps. It's a little bit laborious, but that is just what it is. And likewise, you'll have parts of the image where the black is just a bit too dense. Some of the detail has gone missing. An example in my image was basically with the district nameplate, the Chome nameplate. So this basically says Kawamachi Ichi Chome, and where basically you've got the kanji for Machi up here, the detail was lost. So I was able to basically just patch that back in, removing some of the black density, and figure that out. It's quite time consuming, but it's an essential part of it. How much of it you do is entirely up to you. I wanted to keep this looking slightly hand-drawn, which is why the image of Saki, for example, still has a slightly bold outline to it. That was the effect I was looking for. I didn't want a single pixel outline. So that's why I'm using this ink to pixels conversion process. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Is this any quicker than perhaps drawing a background directly in Deluxe Paint, particularly as it's a black and white outline, or any pixel art package for that matter? Well, the answer is there probably isn't really any time advantage. It's just a matter of which process you enjoy doing the most. Now, I really love drawing by hand, and I particularly enjoy drawing backgrounds by hand. So for me, this method works quite well, and as I say, I was looking for that slightly inked aesthetic. But if I was perhaps designing something for a game, or something where I wanted just very singular pixel outlines of things without that hand-drawn look, then perhaps drawing directly into a pixel art package to start with would have been good. But then, of course, obviously you have to contend with the fact that most pixel art packages don't offer you much in the way of perspective tools. They don't offer you parallel rulers, so you're going to be having to work that out by hand. And unless you're used to actually drawing with perspective, it's a bit of a learning curve. Now, that is no bad thing. It's actually quite good if you learn how to draw with perspective, and it will come to you with time and practice. So it's definitely worth trying. But I personally find that it's easier to draw a background image like that when you have the right set of tools. Now, admittedly, I actually drew that background before I had a parallel drawing board. Now, thanks to my Patreons, I've been able to actually purchase a parallel drawing board, which is going to be essential for my Manga future saviors to get tight background drawings that look good and accurate and not just drawn by eye. But I was able to draw that background just using a ruler, pair of triangles, and just using my eye. It's not perfect, but it looks good enough. So it's a bit of 6 of one, half a dozen of another. I don't think either way is quicker. I think whether you start doing the background entirely in a pixel art package, or whether you do it through the ink into pixels conversion process, it's just going to be a matter of aesthetic and process that you prefer. There's room in this world for both. So now I've got my pixel art outline, and let me show you what that looks like. So here it is, folks. This is my outline. I've already put a bit of sort of colouring for some reason on the okaeri. Sorry, can't read hiragana. Okaeri, basically like welcome home, I think is essentially what that means. At least that's what I understand from it. But I've already got my outline. I've fixed it all up in terms of filling in the gaps and so forth, so that when it comes to using flood fills or whatever it is, I've got the image pretty much how I want it to be. There's a few little bits just to sort out with the aircon unit up here perhaps, and also this bicycle just needs a little bit of fine tuning if you ask me. But otherwise, this is now ready for the next episode, which is going to be where I show you how I shade this in. So it's really beginning to come together, I think you can agree. I'm actually really rather pleased with this result. It's obviously taken a little while to get the outline looking how I wanted it to, but I think overall it's well worth it. So the third part of this is going to be me showing you the shading of this pixel art version and then merging it with the character of Saki, which I showed you at the top of this video. So you're going to be seeing a lot of Saki. As I mentioned, she is one of the main characters in my next Manga Future Saviours, so I need to actually slightly tweak the version of her that I did last time actually, and that you saw on the screen for most of this video, because character design has just ever so slightly been tweaked since that version. But otherwise, that's pretty much all I have to say at the moment. So I hope you enjoyed this. Be really interested to hear what you have to say about the process, any questions that you may have, any tips and suggestions for me that you found to actually work quite well. But otherwise, I guess all remains for me to say is see you soon. Peace. So it's come to that part of the video where I mention that I'm on Patreon. From as little as $2 a month, you can get early access to content, exclusive artwork through the post, your name mentioned on videos, as well as tips that I don't publish to the public. You can find a link in the video description below. Your subscription to my channel will also help me ensure that I can bring the latest content here from Japan.